Hey everyone, this is Alan Schimmel, and welcome to another Techstrong webinar. Actually, today is a special edition webinar. It is a roundtable of our DevOps Unbound series. For those of you not familiar, DevOps Unbound is a bi-weekly video series where we assemble a panel of leading experts to talk about all things DevOps. And then every month or so, we do a live roundtable in a similar vein to talk about things DevOps. And but what makes it a little different is we do it live, and we open. Oh, someone's saying they have no voice. I don't know if my engineers on the back end can check. Um, but we open our roundtable up to you, our audience. And it's really pretty unique because when this thing works right, it really works well. Um, from Hello from Madrid, and Carlos can hear. Thank you. And if you guys want to check in and tell us where you're checking in from, that's a great start. I always love to see where our audience is coming from. Um, so some of you may have found the chat function already. I see. So that communications bar, which for most of you is on the right hand side of your screen, actually has several different functions. One is a public chat, which some of us are using now. And keep in mind when you put something in that public chat, you can talk to anyone on this webinar, panelists, audience, etc., and anyone can talk back to you. If you want to talk to the presenters, if you want to ask our panel a specific question, and the best way for you to do that is not to do it in the public chat, but to go to the Q&A section of your communication panel. You'll see there's a nice way in there to just put that in there. And hello back to friends in South Africa. So we have Q&A to talk to our panel members, public chat to speak to each other as well as to us. We will try to answer your questions. You know what? But it's your questions, your comments, your thoughts that will help drive today's roundtable. Now, that getting out of the way, let me present to you what I think is just an amazing cast for today's roundtable. Some of you may know, some of you may not know that we recently announced, Media Ops moving or being rebranded as the Techstrong Group. And one of the business units of Techstrong Group is Techstrong Research, which was made up of the Accelerated Strategies Group, Mitchell Ashley, founder and principal analyst, and he's here with us. And then we were really blessed and lucky in the last week, or actually last week, to announce that Hurwitz and Associates were joining us. And we have the two lead analysts from Hurwitz and Associates with us today, Judith Hurwitz, who's now president of Techstrong Research, and Dan Kirsch, who's managing director of Techstrong Research. I'm going to give you each a chance to introduce yourself in a second. In addition to my three esteemed analysts, I'm really lucky to have Jonathan Boswell, product marketing manager for Tricentis here. I'm going to introduce him in a moment. Tricentis is the sponsor of DevOps Unbound, and many, many thanks to them for it. I should say before I introduce, give each panel member a chance to introduce themselves. Today's roundtable is around research, around testing in a DevOps world. And we're going to be talking about that. But even more than talking about it, at the end of today's webinar, we will put up either in the handouts or chat a link for you all to download the report free. And you'll be the first people to get this in public. So I hope you'll enjoy it and find it worthwhile. All right, let me introduce you to our panel today. Let's start on my left with Dan Kirsch. Dan, you want to just introduce yourself?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm Dan Kirsch, Managing Director at Techstrong Research. Been working closely with Judith. We focus a lot on DevOps, cloud, new ways of developing software, cloud native, and a lot to do with data and AI. It sounds like a lot, but what ties it all together is business outcomes. So what we're really focused on is how all these emerging technologies impact the business. So what's the bottom line when it comes to all these different technologies?
Excellent. All right, next up, Jonathan Boswell. Jonathan, would you like to introduce yourself?
Absolutely. Hey, everyone. My name is Jonathan Boswell. I am a product marketing manager at Tricentis, and I've got more than 25 years in the software industry, working on everything from small projects to big projects, small companies to big companies. Testing has been a continuous thread throughout my career, and I am really happy to be here now joining you guys talking about testing, one of my favorite topics.
Absolutely. Thank you. All right. Next up is Mitchell Ashley. Mitchell, if you wouldn't mind yourself.
Yeah, happy to be here. Happy to be co-hosting as well as serving as an analyst today, and joined by Judith and Dan, who will have Judith introduce herself in a moment. So in addition to being a principal at now Techstrong Research, I'm also CTO at Techstrong Group with Alan. So overseeing the technology platforms and things that we do. And I'm a long-time product creator, led IT organizations and product development teams, also running companies as CEO, CTO, CIO kind of roles. So testing are some of my favorite people because they tell me what's really happening. So I love to talk about testing. So and we have some really exciting information in this new research that we've completed. So I won't hold us up any longer. So back to you,
No
Al.
problem. And then last but not least, on my far right, on my screen anyway, the one and only Judith Horowitz. Hello, Judith. Welcome. And if you
Hi, Alan. Thank you. It is so exciting to be here and being part of such a great company as Techstrong Group. Dan and I are thrilled to be co-founding Techstrong Research with Mitch. And as Dan mentioned, our goal is to look at all of the threads put together that make organizations that are using technology not just as a back-end function, but to really drive their businesses through very disruptive times. So it's really an exciting time for the industry. And I'll quickly start off with some of what we have found in this research and where we've come in terms of testing in a DevOps world. What is the most interesting is if you look back just a few years ago, developers didn't think very kindly of testers. They were the pesky people who slowed things down, caused problems. All the developer wanted to do is just get their job done. I'm sure Mitch has experienced that once or twice.
I haven't heard that before, but okay, I'll trust you, Judith.
Okay. But what is changing now, and looking at the results from this study of more than 550 developers and testers in the DevOps space, was that testing is now part of the process. DevOps is real. And I think, what I would take away from that is in this new era where we're not building unified applications with a beginning, middle, and an end, but we're creating microservices. We're containerizing them. We have to deal with software as a service applications where we don't control anything. And all of these applications together define the enterprise. So if there are mistakes and errors, it's not just whoops, the application isn't reacting the way we want it to, but the whole company can collapse. So in my mind, the fact that developers and testers and operations folks are looking at this much more holistically than ever before is a really interesting outcome that we saw from the research.
Absolutely. Guys, I would just remind the audience, because many of you probably joined a few moments late, that, public chat is open beyond telling us where you're from, which we always appreciate. Once we get kicking in here, feel free to ask questions in there. You can also ask questions of our panel specifically under the Q&A section of your communications panel on your right-hand side. So Judith, I think that was a good synopsis, to get us started of where we were going here and what we're looking at. Jonathan, if you don't mind, you represent Tricentis here.
Mhm.
And let's talk about, this was a report that was done by, the research team.
Mhm.
But, Tricentis had an interest in seeing what these results were. You guys are probably talking to many more than 550 testers and developers out there. What was this report? What did you think was interesting here in this report, or surprising?
Great question. So one of the things we do at Tricentis is we talk to customers all the time. Development teams, big, small, and look at a lot of research. And so figure out where the industry is going, where testing is headed, where DevOps is headed, and really want to be on that cutting edge of where the industry is going. So research like this is always fascinating to read, not only for the individual tidbits that come out of it, because every report has some really kind of interesting data, but how it fits into, in the literature, as they say. How does it fit among the other trends that that other research and our own research is discovering. And what I found through this particular piece that's really interesting is the idea, the conversation about bottleneck versus benefit, and how testing, as we were saying, is being more accepted as part of the software delivery process and not this completely separate entity, separate process. But also that the complexity, you really start to see in some of the answers, and I'm sure we'll get to those, the reflection that teams are at different phases of DevOps maturity. And where they're struggling, you can see how there's multiple answers that seem to be giving opposite, maybe, opinions. And I think that is a reflection that different teams are at different stages of maturity. And I really kind of look forward to digging into that in a little bit.
Absolutely. Dan, I'd like to throw it to you, though, and give you a chance to kind of weigh in here.
Yeah, digging a little bit more into the data, I think Jonathan will be happy to know. We asked respondents, is testing just a checkbox, or does it add value to your DevOps process? And I thought it was somewhat surprising. Only 2% of respondents said it's just a checkbox. There's no value in testing, which was a good thing, because as Judith was saying earlier, people understand that to put out high quality software, you need testing. You can't just, go is great. And if you're going to just judge your DevOps success on, we had 22 updates this week, that's great. But if they fail, it doesn't matter. Your business is sank. The partners are furious. So I thought that finding was surprising, that people are sort of getting this idea that testing is critical to your DevOps efforts.
Yeah. It's funny. I was actually recording a panel on mainframes and DevOps this morning. And one of the panel members brought up that the biggest inhibitor to greater DevOps adoption on the mainframe platform is a lack of automated testing for mainframe applications. The tools that we develop them on. Because this whole test automation and automating testing and doing, it's so intrinsically, it's the enabler, it's the igniter, if you will, of this whole, what we do in DevOps, right? Trying to get software delivered faster, better, quicker, more often. And testing, I would expect only 2% of people who say it's a checkbox. It's, how can you make testing a checkbox? That's kind of putting a gun to your head and, just keep pulling the trigger, like they call it Russian roulette, right? Mitchell, I haven't given you a chance to kind of weigh in here, man. What do you say?
Well, it's having gone through transitions with a couple of teams into the DevOps experience, CI/CD is often where people start, and automated testing is not far behind it. Now, organizations are all over the map of where they are in their journey to automating testing. Some that's a massive challenge for others. They've made really good progress, and a lot of that has to do with greenfields or not. I think there are a couple key messages from this research, and that is, if I say on a macro level, software is the strategy now. That is what businesses are using to, in the disruptive times, as Judith mentioned, or having competitive strategies, defensive strategies, whatever it might be. Software is not back office. Their ability to deliver software is vital to delivering on their business strategies. And you can see that with the acceleration that people expect to be able to deliver software with quality more quickly. And so they expect the testing to move right along with that, to also be automated and helping improve quality. So in a way, testing has this dual-edged challenge of not only, not just staying relevant, but becoming much more of the DevOps process and automation and part of the delivery process, the workflow within DevOps. But also, as we do delivery of software much more quickly in smaller increments, microservices, et cetera, testing has to move even faster. So it has a dual challenge of adoption into the DevOps workflow and delivering it more quickly at the same time as we use, microservices, cloud native containerized type applications. The other thing I think was really compelling about this is the complexity around third-party apps, particularly third-party services, other SaaS applications, other apps in the organizations that might be being developed. Oftentimes, you push out a release, you push out an update, software deploy. You get a call from this marketing group or from this ops group or whatever saying, "Hey, you broke my app. Well, I didn't even know you were using our app." More or less, if you're tying to Salesforce or some other third-party service, they update their service without ever telling you either. So you've not only got to be able to deliver what you want quickly, you have to be able to respond when things happen quickly that you aren't.
So Mitch,
aware of. Yeah, jump in, Judith.
Yeah, so I think one of the interesting aspects of that is the fact that organizations are really beginning, the more sophisticated or the more mature organizations are building microservices, which is a wonderful thing because you're not building monolithic applications. You're building services that can be linked together, put into a container, and it really does speed the development process. However, if you create a microservice and it's not tested, and now you deploy it in 20 different applications within your organization, and then your partners use it, and your employees use it, and there's this ugly little bug in that, you're going to blow up everything. And I think people a number of years ago really got excited about the idea of microservices. And what we're seeing now, and I think the research bears this out, is that people are understanding both the power and the risks of microservices if you don't do that testing.
Well, I also think a big theme of what Mitch just brought up and what Judith brought up is a loss of control. So it used to be that organizations controlled all their applications. They chose when they wanted to update it. If you don't want to take the point releases, that's fine. You can update every 3 years. If you're using a major enterprise SaaS platform, Salesforce, ServiceNow, what have you, you're not going to call you up and say, "Hey, we're about to update. Do you want to do this update or not?" You log in and everything looks different. We actually dug into this a little bit in the survey. Almost 20% of respondents said, when a SaaS service updates, we take a cross your fingers and hope approach, and then they'll fix broken things when in production. So they'll just sort of see what happens. And then additionally, there's a loss of control, as Judith was saying, even within your organization. You don't know who's using what applications, and then you're being told, test this, test that. It didn't come through the IT organization. It could have come through the business. And so the IT DevOps organization has sort of lost control on what's in their application portfolio and also when things are updated.
Yep.
There's also some interesting data too about that. There was some data around, 14% of people said that they lack the internal skills to test cloud native and containerized applications. So we're throwing new technology at the test team, new software architectures. They're having to figure out, all right, how do I do this, right? Do I have the tools today to do this? Do I need to bring in some other things? And how much are they depending upon developers to test cloud native applications? I was kind of shocked. 9% of people said that they're relying on the developers to test it. So in a way it's shocking, in a way it's not. I mean, they're still relying on test teams to do, heavy lifting around the quality and the testing of these applications, cloud native or not.
Agreed. Hey guys, in a perfect example of sometimes you got to walk before you run. We've got a question from the audience. Kwame asked, may I ask the panel to give a definition of DevOps? And how can we talk about testing in DevOps if you don't know what DevOps is? Wow. So, let's go elementary here, guys, and answer Kwame's question. How would you define DevOps? I'm sure over the years this is a question I think many of us in the DevOps space have been asked. Who would like to take a crack here?
I'll jump in, start off.
Mitch.
Yeah, I get this question a lot. Of course, DevOps is a bit of an evolving definition. If I had to break it down, I think it's about how we create software and how we deliver that software, thinking of it in a manufacturing kind of model. So we're working in software architectures today that can be delivered in much smaller pieces. We talked about containers, things like that. So DevOps is how you can go from delivering big pieces of software, releasing it into production, to much smaller increments and doing that much more quickly. So thinking of it rather than a linear pipeline as a process where every step in the pipeline is being automated and happening multiple times. You're checking in code, you're running tests against code, you're doing integration, you're doing testing in a test environment, testing in a delivery simulated environment, maybe even testing in production. And that's a flow that's being automated and being run multiple times per day, sometimes per hour, et cetera. So it's all about delivering software much more quickly in smaller bites and pieces so that companies, businesses can be much more competitive in how they rely and deliver their software.
Yeah, I just jump in and add to that. It's also the combination of people and processes and technology all working together and from different groups, right? So traditionally, we were talking earlier, developers over here, testers over here, operations way over there, and never, the twain shall meet or whatever it is. This is the idea of DevOps. Okay, how do we bring all this together, the people together, and create processes that actually hopefully streamline and speed up the delivery and maintenance of your software applications. And I think we often tend to kind of overlook that people and processes part and focus a lot on the technology, which is important. But I think it's the combination of all three that really separates people who are good at DevOps from people who are still maturing.
I think it's also sort of the change in the way we think about software. They're developers, they're people in operations, they're people in testing, and they're all separate, disconnected groups. I think the philosophy between DevOps is that it's a continuous process. It doesn't have sharp, endpoints. Everything becomes sort of this cycle of development, testing, operations, back to development. You hear of organizations that may rev their applications 20 times a day. So you can't just say, okay, I'll test once every 6 months.
And I think what Jonathan was saying, it might sound silly, but even there's companies that get new furniture, everything has wheels, you move teams around. It sounds trivial, but people are working with people that they've never worked with. Normally they just package something up and send it to another group, and instead they're collaborating in different ways. Today's team is going to be different than tomorrow's team. And the idea is that you can get as many DevOps technologies as you want. You can, implement them, don't implement them. It's not going to help unless you have culture changes and big things, process changes, and sometimes even some people changes to get everything more collaborative. And then the technology supports the people and process.
Exactly.
Excellent. I think that was a great one. All right. Now that we've got that laid down, let's turn back here, right, to our report. We were really starting to get into the heart of it. Jonathan, again, I'm going to come back to you here. I mean, we spoke about what did you think was surprising. What other insights do you want to make sure people take out of this report?
I think it's the connection that when we were just talking about, that is as much about process as it is about technology, and especially the idea that a lot of software now is being developed on the microservice. It's both. There's this great question about, I'm trying to remember exactly how was it phrased, but is it basically, with microservices, is it faster to test, easier to test, or does it make testing harder? And there was a real split where some people said it's a lot easier, and some people said, an equal number said, it was a lot harder, right? And I think that really speaks to the balance. You might be making smaller pieces of software, which individually, as individual pieces of code, is faster to test because there's less of it. But the connection across the enterprise is so much more complex that it makes that end testing much more difficult. The individual developer may not know, as we were discussing, who's actually using their code, right? So yes, this works for me. It's internally consistent. It passes all my developer unit tests. So I'm going to ship it, and then next thing you know, stuff's blowing up all over the place. Business is disrupted, and what happened, right? It's because the developer may not have had insight to how that code was actually being used by different teams, or different applications are being built off of it. So that's where testing can be both easier and more complex, and you can't lose track of the fact that all the code that you're making, as fast as you're moving, there's other parts of the organization that are dependent on that, and if you don't test all the way across, you're bound to run into trouble.
Jonathan, I think you bring up a really important point. If you look at some of the major outages over the last couple of years, most of them are not in fact because somebody had a bug in software, but it's things like they didn't check to make sure that a configuration file was updated. I think
exactly
that I think Google and several other companies had major outages because, we updated software and we never checked to make sure that changing configuration was implemented. So testing it's not just, whoops, the application has a bug, but it brings down not only one set of applications, but it can bring down a whole software supply chain across the globe, where thousands and hundreds of thousands of companies are suddenly out of business.
Exactly. Yeah, it really is, great and terrible, the power that software has over, the economy as a whole, but, companies individually. And it can be something as simple as you say, as a configuration file. We tested the software, we tested this, but the integration, we never checked. So we never ran the end-to-end test to see how it worked across. And I think that is the key takeaway that certainly at Tricentis we want to emphasize, is that business success, that the business risk isn't necessarily this individual piece of code in itself. It's what impact it has across the organization and to the actual ability of that business to run and produce and do all its work. So that's the really interesting thing that I found in this report, is how you can see that reflected in the answers.
Yeah, going back to what Jonathan was saying about containerization, making testing easier and harder. I think it was about 40% of people said containerization is making testing harder because it's hard to understand how the dependencies between containers. 40% it's easier because we've got discrete containers making up this big application. And I think some of that has to do with maturity of the DevOps organization, also approaches to containerization. Are you really modernizing your applications, or are you containerizing very large parts of your application? I mean, there's technologies to take a monolithic application, put it in a container. You're not getting any of the benefits of containerization. So you're sort of just containerizing all of those problems. So
but it's interesting that 40% this side, 40% that side, right? That's a pretty even number. I got to tell you, in my mind, I think, supposedly one of the benefits, I think, of containerization was that we were supposed to make it easier to test. Maybe I'm wrong. The whole GitOps and all of this kind of thing. But one of the things that I'm constantly amazed at is the scope of testing. We seem to run tests today that I never even thought of, right? But yet, I'm still surprised when I hear an app, a SaaS provider or someone tells me, that's a Safari thing, right? You must be using Safari. It doesn't work well in Safari. Well, dude, didn't you test in a few different browsers? Didn't you test it on an iPhone or an Android device, right? It's like the Bruce Springsteen song, right? 57 or 500 channels on, nothing's on. 500 channels and nothing's on. 5 million tests and it still don't work.
Yeah,
so you hear what I'm saying.
it's so funny, Alan. One of my first experiences in software world working with developers and testers is the testers would complain. So in the various number, hey, this doesn't work, and the developer's response is, it works on my machine.
Yeah, well,
right? And so that's great. Right? We'll send all the customers to your machine, and they'll do all the work. So that's obviously, we've come a long way, hopefully, since then. And and to your point, systems have gotten even more complex since the 90s when I first heard that. So again, the idea that there's not only just different types of mobile testing versus web testing, but you've got performance testing now, security testing, unit testing, all these different types of tests that you need to run. And this goes back to DevOps, and you need to run them faster than ever, right? Speed becomes an important metric. And so you have to deliver quality, but you have to deliver it at speed. And one without the other, and it's not going to work. You're either going to be too slow and miss the market, or you're going to be fast and break your business. So how do you get the right amount of testing, run the right tests at the right time so you can deliver fast? I think is the key challenge for DevOps, and it's what we're seeing reflected here, in this research as well.
And that comes down to issues like automation. How can you automate the things that you can automate so that your developers and testers are paying attention to the anomalies that are out of the ordinary. But without automation and without looking at it from a business process standpoint, you're going to be in real trouble.
Yeah, so one question we asked the respondents is, does testing slow down the release of new software? Only 4% said never, so which isn't a huge surprise. And so what makes those 4% different from everyone else? Basically all of them said we have internal testing capabilities to keep up with demand. So a big part of that is, as Judith mentioned, automation. Part of it's just having the resources, having the people who have the skills to do the testing also.
Yep. the thing about automation, though, is automation alone is not enough, right? If you're automating the wrong tests, you're just getting the wrong results faster, right? You're gonna get to disaster faster because you're shipping bad software sooner. So part of it, and what I like too, is in the research, it talks about the importance, as you were just mentioning, of the business value. What's the business impact of this? And if you focus like solely on code, because a lot of time the developers are the testers. If you don't know, they don't know where this is going to be used. They don't know the business impact of what they're developing, so the business context, certainly. So if you're not testing for the business results, you're not testing, if you don't have an understanding of where the critical, parts of your business are that absolutely have to run every time, you might not be testing those. So part of the automation strategy has to be making sure that you understand the business risks involved and make sure that you're covering those with your testing. Otherwise, you can spend all day creating automated tests, run them quickly, and they're the wrong tests, and you're not going to get anywhere. You're not going to reduce the risk.
I think one of the things that's fundamentally changed, though, about the whole environment we're doing this in is we used to be able to say, well, our app only runs on IE7. Our app runs on this operating system and not that operating system. And those days are gone. It needs to run on all platforms, all browsers. Anybody in the world expects to be able to pick up whatever device they want to use. My Windows XP machine that I haven't updated since 1998, I think it should run there. I'm not saying it will, but that's the environment that we're testing for. So, to your point, Alan, like, did your people test this stuff? Well, yeah, but since we tested it, Chrome has been updated 18 times in the last, 40 days. And who knows what broke in that. So, much like in security, we used to think all about prevention, and now we think response is actually more important. It's still important to prevent. Same thing in testing. It's important to test, but the ability to respond quickly, because we are not going to find everything, and the environment is completely changing. It's fluid. It's not a solid. It's constantly changing. So we have to be able to react fast when something comes up, whether it's a SaaS provider and their API or a browser update on some new, I think, by the way, Alan, we need to test some of the new Apple M1 Max chips.
I'm pre-ordering a few machines in that.
Okay, good. I wanted to get that on record since we're recording this. That's a whole nother conversation. So anyway, my point is it's a moving target constantly, and it's changing faster all the time.
So there we did ask about SaaS applications. And I think it's something that customers are still sort of grappling with. I think the data indicated that people don't quite understand the implications, because if we just look in the market, more and more customers are using SaaS applications, and sometimes the people doing the development and testing of new applications don't even know that a specific SaaS application is being used, and that they should test against, those 14 SaaS applications that are being used. And I think that this is a challenge that will not go away. In fact, it's going to get a lot worse and really have a huge impact for people doing DevOps and testing.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, so there's this whole SaaS ops thing, right? And how are we? I mean, that's the world that we live in here. I'm curious, in surveys like this, sometimes you get more from what isn't answered than what is answered, right? Messages from the 500 plus folks who took this survey, maybe that weren't necessarily just answers to questions, but maybe, just like the trend that you're seeing there, or, what are they really kind of focusing in on?
I would say that one of the main things that came out of this is a recognition that testing is part of the DevOps process. It's not siloed. in the same ways we're used to it in the past. Now, is it perfect? I'm sure it's not. And, silos are silos and hard to break down. But I think everyone has recognized that the only way we do this successfully is to create cross-functional teams. And just like we bring security into it, we bring testing into it and try to do these things as early as possible. Cultural differences and organizational politics, all are still there, but we know this is what we need to do. So that, to me, the reason why I say that is there was a data point that said over 40% of people said they had a well-orchestrated process for integrating testing into the software update process, and then kind of varying degrees stepping down. But there are only a few that said we're just kind of like happy if we get a release out, whether it's tested or not. People know this is important, and they're making the effort to really figure out how to do it differently.
Agreed. I think people do recognize that. I had a follow-on to that, Mitchell, and it flew out of my head.
Well, another sort of following up with what Mitch was saying, another core response throughout the whole survey was everyone's comfortable with automation. They want automation, whether it's developers or testers. They're not afraid that automation is going to take their job. They see it as automation is going to make it so they can do a better job, find hidden issues, increase speed, use resources for innovation rather than just testing. So actual people, not just businesses, but people want automation.
I agree with that as well. So, but a lesson I've learned in my time at DevOps.com, I think this is an evolutionary thing. First is let's automate everything. Let's automate as much as we can. Let's automate everything. And then, lo and behold, we start to find out is that just because you can automate it doesn't mean you should automate it. And I think that's kind of the phase where we are in testing in DevOps world, in DevOps cycles. We've spent, look, Tricentis is the king of automated testing, right?
Mm-hmm.
But even, I've spoken to Tricentis executives, they will tell you that not everything can be automated.
That's exactly, nor should it.
Nor should they be, exactly.
Right.
And by the same token, when we look at our DevOps teams, the tendency in DevOps for years has been, let's throw another straw on the developer camel's back. Right. Well, let the developer, it's automated, this testing anyway. We'll just have the developer run the automated testing while he's integrating it in Git or whatever. Right. And it kind of, when you think about it, it's a little moronic because your developer is probably your highest paid asset in there. And you're giving him things that aren't just pure coding, right? That really under the realm of your tester. The tester, there are professional testers. Testers are not failed or wannabe developers or developers in training. They're testers. It's a profession. And they should be doing the testing, either setting up the automated testing, doing the manual testing, whatever it takes. It's not the developer's job on the DevOps team.
I like to say, Alan, that if developers are the rock stars, then the testers are the MacGyvers of the world, right? They can figure out anything, how to break it and how to make it work.
Yeah, and then Jonathan, you brought up security testing, which is, it's more where, my background was in security. It's a Johnny-come-lately to this whole process, the idea of doing sort of automated security testing before we release software. Oh my, it sounds so obvious. Why weren't we doing it? But I don't know if it's as caught up or sophisticated or as evolved as some of the other modalities of testing that we see out there.
Yeah, it's certainly getting a lot of attention these days. And so the importance of it is certainly up there. I think I want to go back to what you're saying, like about automation and putting everything on the developer. I don't think it's the job of the developer to necessarily be creating all the tests. I think that certainly leads itself into some danger as its own, because the developer has the idea of how the world should work and how her code should work, and will design the test for that. Whereas a tester, or anybody else for that matter, will be looking at it from different eyes, more closer to the user's point of view. So having a separation, and I think what DevOps and where we've come a long way is that the testing activities can happen earlier in the process. So it's not necessarily on the developer's back to create all the testing and do all the tests. Unit test, code test, absolutely. That's, if the developer has to make the change, then getting them the feedback as close to the time that they were writing the code is much easier. It's more convenient, cheaper, faster, all that kind of stuff. So I think the idea with automation is, how do you run the right test at the right time to get the right people the right feedback at the right time, right? And so if you're doing it, and if the thing that's being tested is a lot of custom code, or a lot of custom applications that you're building, right? You want to get that developer that feedback earlier, and that's where automation can play a huge role.
I think also Judith brought up an interesting word. She used the word anomalies. And so with automation, I like to say, automate the boring, automate the things that require tons of data, millions of lines of code. But those testers who are MacGyvers, let them focus on the few things that are sticking out. This is going to cause a problem, and this is going to take a lot of time and effort to figure out. And then automate the stuff that is repetitive and boring and can be done sort of by a really junior person, and let those testers, as Alan was saying, they're professionals. Let them do the stuff that gets them excited, and automate the other stuff.
And there's a role also for machine learning in this, and we're increasingly seeing if you do if you use machine learning to pick out those patterns, then you can make automation better and better, and that does result in the fact that you can isolate the anomalies and things that can't be automated. So I'm looking for starting to see a lot more machine learning AI models being applied to this area.
Let's bring up AI, because that's another topic that I don't mean to pick on, but it's a kind of hot button topic here, right? Which is, it's not a panacea or a magic bullet, certainly, at best. And at worst, it's like a crutch that we probably draw up some, AI testing kind of formula. Is it real, Jonathan? Are we still at the hype level, at the hype cycle? What's the deal here?
So, AI can cover a lot. Stuff that's true AI, that's more, advanced algorithms. But however you get to it, like anything, it's how you use it, right? So like at Tricentis, what we see, and this is like particularly when you're having some complex enterprise apps like SAP, where it's literally, at least virtually impossible for any one person to really know all of the dependencies that go on. We're talking earlier, if you make a small bit of code, you think this is going to solve one problem, but it's going to cause 10 down the road because you don't know all the dependencies. That's where things like, using automation, using AI, using ML, that has gone out and done that analysis for you, can pay big dividends, because then all of a sudden, as soon as I submit that code for review, the AI is going to come back and say, you got to test all these things, because this is where the big risks are going to be based on our analysis of your landscape and your usage, and it's going to that predictive analysis to say this is where your risks are going to be. So make sure those are things that you test, because can pay big dividends, and that's something that no human is able to do, at least not at the speeds we're talking about with DevOps.
Agreed. Guys, I got to do a little housekeeping.
Mhm.
On these webinars and roundtables, we give away 4 Amazon gift cards, and I wanted to announce the winners of today's Amazon gift cards: Adam K, Joe P, Elliot T, and Tan M are today's winners. Our team will be contacting you and emailing you your Amazon gift cards. So enjoy them, and thank you for attending. More importantly, I've pinned a message here from Mitchell so it's not at the top of your chat window, and that is a link to the report that we've been referencing all afternoon here. The Road of Testing in a DevOps Environment. It is sponsored by Tricentis. I think it's the first Techstrong Research branded report we've done.
It is.
Though Judith and Dan and Mitchell were all involved in it. So, thank those who are attending today. You get first crack at downloading this report, and I think you'll find it chock full of goodness. Guys, we've got to wrap up here. I wanted to kind of ask you, I always like to give people something to take away from these roundtables, right? 1, 2, 3 things that they could take away as something they learned today. So, without putting you all on the spot, give our audience something they could take away from today and from this report that might be able to help them in their career and help their organization. Dan, would you like to go first? I don't want to throw you, but you're always on my left.
Somebody's got to go first, Dan.
So, containerization, big issue. It can help, it can hurt. You got to think about your approach to containerization. It's really about app modernization. The goal isn't just to containerize everything, but you have to think about modernizing your whole app and re-architecting it using containerization, and that'll help things like testing.
Fair enough. I think that's a great one. Judith, would you like to go next?
Yeah, so I think a key takeaway is with everyone using SaaS applications, you can't just assume, well, the vendor that I'm using for a SaaS application will take care of it. I don't have to worry about that. I've even heard customers talk about, well, my applications are on the cloud, so they'll take care of everything. They'll take care of security. They'll make sure that everything is well tested. So the buck stops with you. You have to understand that SaaS vendor. You have to understand how well are they testing their software. You can't just say, well, they're a professional organization, so they must be doing everything right.
Excellent. Jonathan.
So I think one of the key takeaways from this is the recognition that automation in testing is important, and it is a must-have if you want to really move at the speed of DevOps. But in order to do it right, you have to be able to automate the right tests and get the results at the right time to the right people. And that is where you need a broader awareness of the business impacts of your development. And that is where I think AI and ML related tools can really help you get that insight. So it's about automating the right test, not everything, and getting the right information to the right people so they can properly assess the quality, properly assess the risks, so that you can actually ship higher quality software faster and not have to wait for the defects to pop up down the road.
Mitch, how about you?
Well, I think the underlying message in this research is that, if anything, testing, then the role of testing has been elevated in its importance, even more so than it has been in the past. It certainly hasn't been diminished. I remember when DevOps started, we won't need operations or testing or whatever. The developers are all going to do it. Not true. It's never been more critical than before. I remember early in my career, I learned test teams are my best friend, because that's who I found out where we really were on the project to getting software out the door. And now we have to rethink testing. We have to rethink about, we have to learn how to containers and managing that. We have to do security testing. We have to be part of automation, but not just writing scripts. I have to be part of this whole workflow. So our industry continues to evolve to and change, and testing right along with it, in some ways, even more so. So I think there's some really great news in this report, and I'm excited where we're going next.
Yep, agreed. Again, I'd encourage everyone to download the report. It's a good one, and if you're involved in testing or want to be or thinking about it, it really is something. Panel members, I want to thank you all for participating. Thank you so much for the report as well, and the research and analysis that went into it. Mitchell and Dan and Judith, man, knock them dead there at Techstrong Research. You guys have everything, all of the ingredients to making a fantastic research and analysis team. Many thanks to Tricentis for sponsoring not only today's roundtable, but our bi-weekly DevOps Unbound show, which is a lot of fun to do, one of my favorite things. Most of all, thank you all for registering and attending. If you're watching this on demand, not live, the link should still work for you, so you can download it. And we appreciate you taking time out of your busy day to spend some time with us here at Techstrong. For now, though, this is Alan Schimmel. We're going to wrap up today's webinar. Have a great day, everyone, and be well. We'll see you at another webinar soon.
Thanks, everyone.